It turns out my best friend was the killer the whole time. What's the biggest plot twist you've seen in real life? In primary school, we had a World War I memorial lesson and we were asked if anyone had any relatives who fought at the time. My friend brought in a picture of his great-great-grandfather with his wife. A girl also brought in a picture of her great-great-grandfather with his wife. The teacher said they looked similar. She put them side by side and looked shocked. We gathered around and it was the same man who had kept his two wives a secret. Both had been married privately. They were cousins and didn't know. Maybe this isn't that big, but here it goes. I'm a medic and one morning we had a call for an older woman, 70s if I remember right. She was having cardiac issues, was in compensated shock from a very low heart rate. From the time we got to her home to the time we were in the ambulance, she had gotten much worse. We paced her heart, and she was doing good for the rest of our hour ride to the hospital. About 16 hours later we get called for a rollover car accident. Get there and we have one male in the vehicle, unresponsive. The vehicle is upside down off the road. We get him out, he is in very bad shape. I wasn't breathing, so we intubated him and off to the hospital we went. Almost to the hospital, which is 30 miles away, and he goes into traumatic cardiac arrest. Dead when we get there. While we were on the way to the hospital we found his wallet, since we didn't know who he was. The SAW is a badge. A retired police officer, and I remember from the morning, our patient's husband was a retired officer. He was on his way to see his wife. Unfortunately, he stopped by the bar first. While it wasn't my job, I went with the nurse to talk to the wife and let her know what happened. She thanked me for being there for her family so much that day. I have a coworker Joe, a great guy who has an equally great wife, Nina. Over the years, and even prior to meeting Joe, multiple doctors told Nina she would be unable to get pregnant on her own due to problems with her ovaries and fallopian tubes. She and Joe decided that a child-free life was okay with them. So, she and Joe married and lived happily for 12 years. When they started out, they didn't have much, but as time passed, they progressed in their careers and made a nice life for themselves. Finally, they got to a point that they were comfortable enough to buy a sports car for themselves, something Joe always wanted to do. It was the first new, off-the-lot car they ever owned. Now Joe and Nina were in their early 40s at this time and figured they'd just coast on into retirement. Well, about 6 months after they bought the car, winter came. Nina got a case of the flu she just couldn't seem to shake. She just felt run down and nauseous, just not herself. After about 3 weeks of this, she went to the doctor. The doctor asked if there was any possibility she could be pregnant. She laughed at him and said, "I've been married for 12 years now and haven't had so much as a scare of being pregnant. Multiple doctors said it's just not going to happen for me. No way." But, her doctor said, "Humor me and let me rule it out. Just do a urine test." Well, wanting to figure out what was actually wrong with her ASAP, Nina peed on the stick and, you guessed it, pregnant. So, in their 40s and with 12 years of living just the two of them, they were expecting. After the initial shock wore off, they were actually pretty excited even though they had to sell the sports car, since a two-seater wasn't really going to work for them. A few months later, their son John came into the world the usual way, happy, healthy baby. So, they became a family of 3 and they still are today. John just finished his first year of high school, great kid and super smart too. You just never know what life's gonna throw at you. My sister's boyfriend decided that he wanted to do more with his architecture skills, so he gave us 2 weeks notice and moved to Haiti to help rebuild after the earthquake. They stayed together. He had bad phone service, so they mostly kept in touch through emails. He would send her long emails with photos and stories of what they were doing. This went on for a couple of months. One offhanded tip from a coworker and a week of sleuthing later, and it turns out he never went to Haiti. He moved to Seattle to be with his fiancée and partner of 9 years. During the last year of my grandfather's life, he had dementia and was having trouble keeping track of reality. Before he was placed into hospice, he kept complaining about a man that was in his house. He would say that he would come around at night and that he was taking his things and using his stuff. Grandma, of course, kept reassuring him that she was the only one there. His doctor increased his medications because he was losing touch with reality so badly. Fast forward to my grandfather's funeral and a man showed up that wasn't known by more than a few people in the family. Turns out he was an old friend of my grandmother's who showed up to give his support. In a small town like that, it wasn't exactly an unusual thing to have random people show up to the funeral home who knew the person at some point. Well, about a year later my grandmother lets slip that she is seeing someone, the guy from the funeral. At this point nothing too odd, they got to talking at church and we thought it was sweet. Then a bit later sweet innocent old grandma mentions that it's their 3rd anniversary. Grandpa died 2 years prior. This man was the person that Grandpa saw in his house every night. He was the reason that everyone thought Grandpa was going crazy. He was the reason that my grandfather was medicated to the point of being a vegetable for the last horrible year of his life. A guy I knew in high school English class was talking one winter day about how he was late to school because someone hit his mailbox. His folks made him fix it up before he went to school. He missed his ride and had to walk instead, but the school staff was cool about it and didn't punish him. A few minutes later, another girl comes into class and she's talking about how her morning sucked. She lost control going down a hill and hit someone's mailbox. She freaked out and drove off before anyone witnessed it and described a few details of the house. Mailbox guy puts 2 and 2 together and blurts out, "You hit my mailbox." He wasn't super mad about it and she turned beet red. It was hilarious at the time the way they both reacted. We are living in Florida at the time and my dad goes to the eye doctor because he is seeing double. In all other respects, he's healthy. He explains his symptoms to the doctor. This was the early 2000s. The doctor picks up a medical book on eye problems. He finds the kind symptoms my dad is describing. The doctor shows him the book. In the book, there is a whole medical page explaining what he is experiencing and a picture of a kid from the 1960s. My dad looks at the picture and says, "Doc, that's me." The doctor says, "Yes, those are the symptoms you are showing." My dad says, "No, really, that's me in the picture." It turns out my dad had this eye problem when he was a kid and it was so rare that they took his picture in 1960s Ohio and slapped him in a book of rare eye problems. He doesn't remember much about taking the picture, but he did manage to get a copy of it to take home. I dated a girl who lived in a city I had recently moved away from. On my birthday I drove out so that we could be together / go out to dinner. The entire time we were at dinner she was distant and constantly checking her phone / sending texts / etc. There was virtually no conversation and her constant texting was uncharacteristic and started to give me the vibe that she was either cheating on me or just not that into the relationship anymore. When we finish eating she asks if it's okay if we stop by a mutual friend's house to pick up some weed. I reluctantly agreed, thinking it was a pretty selfish request considering it was my birthday and I don't smoke weed. As we're walking up the steps to our friend's apartment I'm running through different ways for me to break off the relationship up until the door opens and I realize she had planned a big surprise party with a ton of my old friends, many of which she didn't even know. All of the texts and lack of attention that I had been attributing to a lack of interest in me turned out to be the exact opposite. She's a beautiful person. I was on a flight from Paris to Boston. I had the aisle seat across from a little hall of bathrooms in the middle of the plane. At one point a man from a few rows up goes into a bathroom and after a couple of minutes comes out and is just standing in the aisle, so it gets my attention. He keeps going in and coming back out looking up towards where he is sitting. I see a woman who is sitting next to his empty seat shake her head at him, but he doesn't give up. Finally, after like 5 times of coming in and out, he finally gets the woman to come back there. The lights are out and most of the plane is sleeping, and once she comes back to him they start making out in the bathroom hallway before he goes into one and pulls her in with him. They are in there for quite a while and then he comes out and goes back to his seat, and a few minutes later she comes out and does the same. They are really flirty in their seats and about an hour later repeat it. The man goes in and then she joins him. They end up doing this 3 times throughout the flight. My husband, who is sitting next to me, has caught on to what they are doing as well, and we made a joke about how they must be newlyweds on their honeymoon. We get off the plane and the woman is standing at the gate waiting and the man is nowhere in sight. As the people from the back of the plane get off, a completely different man goes up to her and gives her a kiss on the lips and asks her if she was able to get any sleep on the flight and calls her dear. Then they walk off towards the luggage area with their arms around each other. So apparently what we thought was an adventurous newlywed couple was actually a woman hooking up with her seatmate while her husband was sitting in the back of the plane. I worked for a bank at their call center as a workforce admin. We had a supervisor with a higher than normal personnel rotation. People would be doing okay, then suddenly their numbers would drop, and quit. In one of those, the guy quitting made a big fucking scene, called him out, insulted him, pushed him around, and ended up being restrained by other coworkers. At the HR meeting, a supervisor is going off on this guy, bringing up every single thing the guy did wrong. He was boasting a bit too about how he had to fix all of these dudes' mistakes. The entire time, the guy sat silent, said nothing, just stared at whoever asked him something. When the HR rep asked if he had anything to add, he pulled out a tape recorder, and just played recording after recording. Of what, you ask? Of the supervisor literally threatening the guy, harassing him, belittling him, and overall being a complete asshole. Apparently, this guy would target overperforming agents and make their working environment hell, to protect his position. I'm told the supervisor simply stared at his feet and nodded when told he was fired. The agent, as I understand it, was also let go, but very well compensated. For a semester in high school, my English teacher set up this game where one student was a secret killer. Every couple of days the killer would sneak a note into a classmate's locker, backpack, textbook, or whatever that says you've been killed. My best friend and I were trying harder than anyone else in the class to play detective on this, especially near the end of the semester. Near the end of school, there were about 6 students left alive, and it turns out my best friend was the killer the whole time. The little town I grew up in had these 2 car dealerships on opposite sides of town, one Chevy, one Ford. They were bitter rivals. Attack ads, shit-talking salesmen, billboard wars, you name it. When the owner of the Chevy dealership died, it came out he'd also owned the Ford dealership by way of a shell company. No one saw that coming, including a lot of the higher-ups who worked at the dealerships. My esthetician was giving a Brazilian wax to a new client. New client goes on and on about this new guy she is dating, and how he's a bartender at XYZ. The esthetician's boyfriend was the bartender. Always fun to find out you are knee-deep waxing the pussy of the woman you are being cheated on with. I graduated from law and got engaged to the girl I had been with through university. We both applied for the same graduate program and ended up working in the same office in Canberra. 3 months before our wedding I found out she was cheating on me with our mutual boss, and I broke it off with her. Long story short, it got really, really ugly, and the two of us ended up in a very bitter court case over the property. Canberra is a pretty small city and the legal world is pretty bloody small there, too, and everywhere I went I bumped into my ex. It was beginning to seriously get me down, her too, as it transpired, and I applied for an Australian government overseas development job in Tuvalu, a Pacific island with about 11,000 population. It's quite a prestigious job to get, with only 2 positions offered for a 2-year contract on a rotating basis. I was successful in the application and moved on island to start my posting. To discover that my ex was the other successful applicant. I spent the next 2 years sharing a tiny office on a tiny island with the person that I quite honestly loathe more than any other in the world. Studying abroad in England, I planned a weekend trip to Barcelona with this girl. This is pre-cell phones. I overslept. I got to the airport 3 hours late. As soon as I arrive, there's the girl. At the exact same time, we both say, "I am so sorry." Wait, what are you sorry for? Turns out she overslept too. British Airways changed our tickets for us, no charge, and we got to Barcelona a few hours late. Thank you for watching Reddit Space. Please subscribe if you love these Reddit stories.